Ancient Rome, March 15th, 44 BC. Gaius Julius Caesar, dictator for life, is about to be murdered in the Senate House of Rome. On the day Caesar died, Rome was barely hanging on to its republic. It was in the midst of a revolutionary transformation. Caesar's murder left up for grabs a vast empire that spanned parts of 3 different continents and ruled nearly 1/4 of the entire population of planet Earth. Here was an empire to kill for. This podcast brings to life the stories and source material from the pivotal and fascinating age that followed the death of Julius Caesar and the end of the Roman Republic. This period was called the Pax Romana, or the Roman Peace, and it was an age to remember. Was it a golden age, or was it an age of decadence, conspiracies, and political turmoil? I'm Colin Elliott, historian of ancient Rome, and this is the Pax Romana podcast. Episode 1, Caesar is Dead. Welcome to the Pax Romana podcast. Let me introduce myself. I'm Professor Colin Elliott. I'm a historian. I'm an author. I research and teach at Indiana University in the United States, and I've authored 2 books on the Roman Empire. You can look those up on Amazon if you like. I also have a YouTube channel. Just search for @ProfCPE on YouTube, or look me up, Colin Elliott, in the YouTube search bar. I've taught Roman history to university students for more than a decade now. And the podcast that I'm starting today brings some of the stories and the sources that I share in my university classroom directly to you, free of charge, on this podcast. Each episode advances the story of what is called the Pax Romana, and I'll explain more about what that was as we go along. But what you need to know is that these podcasts are meant to be engaging and accessible, as well as informative. I'm going to introduce you to the ancient sources that are behind the stories that we talk about on the podcast. These are the very words of the Romans themselves, as they have been preserved. They come to us in letters, inscriptions. We'll talk about coinage. We'll talk about literature, art, and a variety of other sources as well. From time to time, we'll do special episodes on special topics, movie reviews that are relevant, questions and answers. But overall, we'll be covering the big narrative of events from the death of Julius Caesar for as long as you're willing to listen to me. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe to it, rate it, review it, leave me a comment, and buckle up because this is going to be a fun ride. Let's get started. This is episode 1 of the Pax Romana podcast. Something like 600,000 people were in the city of Rome on March 15th, 44 BC. And perhaps at least one of those people, but probably more, had come into the city for the first time. Maybe they were somebody from a faraway land that had traveled to Rome to get to see the city for the first time. And these people, they might not have even known the names of some of Rome's leading politicians. They probably wouldn't have known as much about the politics of the city, but whether a person was in Rome for the first time or whether they had been a citizen of Rome their entire lives. Over the next 48 hours, starting from the morning of March 15th, every single person in Rome would be talking about the big news of that day. Julius Caesar was dead. Now, to many Romans and non-Romans, Caesar was a heroic, almost superhuman figure. His family was the Julii. This was a family that was older than the Roman Republic itself. And yet, Julius Caesar, despite his amazing pedigree, was a populist through and through. This was a man that had disregarded many of the norms that his fellow elites had rigorously obeyed. One of Caesar's colleagues in the Roman Senate, a man named Marcus Tullius Cicero, and we will talk quite a bit about Cicero in these early podcasts, Cicero wrote the following about Julius Caesar after he died. He said this, quote, "Our tyrant deserved his death for having made an exception of the one thing that was the blackest crime of all. Behold, here you have a man who was ambitious to be king of the Roman people and master of the whole world, and he achieved it. That's Cicero in his On Duties. And Cicero was like most Roman senators in that he saw Julius Caesar's violent politics, the excessive honors he took on for himself, his increasing popularity, as threatening to tear down the Roman Republic, to replace it with something that the Romans couldn't imagine having, which was a monarchy. Rome, in fact, had not had a king in something like 500 years, and many senators would stop at nothing. They would even murder one of their own number if it meant preserving the republic for future generations. And so, to the conspirators that killed Julius Caesar, his murder was justified. It was a tyrannicide. And Caesar's crimes against the republic and its unwritten traditions, its unwritten constitution, were many, and they went back for decades. Caesar's list of potential crimes against the republic was very long. But in the past few years alone, he had done several things, like march an army across the Rubicon, start a civil war. He had enacted sweeping economic reforms in the city of Rome. He had taken on excessive honors, sitting in special chairs, wearing special clothes, accumulating special titles and powers. Instead of holding elections, Caesar was appointing men into offices. Let's go over a few of these items in some detail so you can understand the full significance of just how odious these things were to the more conservative individuals in the Roman Senate. The big one, and the thing that probably started the whole mess, was the fact that Julius Caesar had marched an army into Italy. To do this, he crossed the Rubicon River and then took that army and besieged and captured the city of Rome. A lot of people know about the Rubicon incident, but they don't always know why it is so significant. Caesar was supposed to keep his army in his province. Caesar was off governing a territory the Romans called Gaul. The province of Gaul was largely in what is now modern France. The term for a governor was supposed to just be 1 year. Caesar had a 10-year term. And he was over there butchering and enslaving thousands of Celtic men, women, and children. Now, the Romans were totally fine with that kind of barbarity. In fact, they were elated. Caesar would write them missives from Gaul, bragging about the people that he was butchering and the tactics that he was using to burn Gallic cities, the slaves that he had captured and all of the money that he had made. What really terrified people, however, was when Caesar took that heroic veteran army that was fighting foreigners and marched it across the Rubicon into Italy and then took Rome by force. Now, it was not enough for Caesar to march on the city of Rome. He then took that army that captured Rome and started chasing the conservative senators and Republican loyalists all across the Mediterranean world. He chased them into Spain, to Greece, over to Egypt, down to Africa. And of course, he murdered quite a few of these people. Not only did Pompey the Great end up dying, now Caesar didn't murder Pompey the Great. He was beheaded in Egypt by a pharaoh who was trying to ingratiate himself with Caesar. And by the way, that didn't work because Caesar wanted an opportunity to face Pompey himself and presumably for Pompey to beg for forgiveness. So Caesar was robbed of that. He was very furious with the pharaoh and ended up supporting the pharaoh's sister and wife. Yes, that's as crazy as it sounds. A woman named Cleopatra. And Caesar helped install Cleopatra to the Egyptian throne. And again, this is another thing that we will talk about in a few episodes. So Pompey the Great was killed. And another prominent man that died in these civil wars was a man named Cato. Now, Cato is often thought of as a kind of conscience for the Roman Republic. He was deeply conservative and traditional in his disposition and politics. And it was in Africa that Cato decided that rather than submit to Julius Caesar in defeat, he would commit suicide. And some historians believe that the Roman Republic died with Cato. And as I mentioned before, Caesar also ushered in sweeping economic reforms which alienated some of Rome's wealthiest individuals. Some of these reforms included things like rent controls and debt cancellation. There were a lot of wealthy Romans that were in debt, but a lot of them also held debts from other people, and to have those debts forgiven was a big problem. Caesar also redistributed land to the poor and to military veterans as well, again, dispossessing, in some cases, elites. But it wasn't just the things that Caesar did that were pragmatic during the Civil War that earned him so much ire among Rome's wealthiest and well-pedigreed elites. Caesar seemed to elevate himself above not only those men, but really the Republic itself. In a letter sent to the Senate just before Caesar marched his army into Italy, this is what Caesar said. It's just one sentence, but it has a lot of meaning. Quote, "Prestige has always been of prime importance to me, even outweighing life itself." And that's Caesar in his civil wars. Well, what is he saying there? Caesar is saying that his personal prestige and also the prestige of Rome, which he connects both of those things. He sees himself as a kind of personal embodiment of Rome. He's saying that that level of prestige is more important to him than even his very life. And of course, those words would ring true. Caesar's prestige was so important to him that it cost him his life. And we can see Caesar's pursuit of prestige in numerous places, and I'm not going to list them all, but let's focus on just a couple. Caesar held the position of Pontifex Maximus. This is the chief priesthood of Roman religion. Now, this isn't exceptional. There are lots of Romans that have held that position in history. It's a regular, normal position in the Roman Republic. But it did carry a lot of power with it because Caesar could use that position to oversee all religious activities, but also political activities as well, because every political meeting, every political decision, even votes, elections, Senate meetings, all of these types of events were contextualized by religious activities, rituals, auguries, omens, and also interpretations. So by being Pontifex Maximus, Caesar had a kind of authority over religious and political activity in the city. So like I said, him being Pontifex Maximus is not alone a problem. But it starts to get a little dicey when you learn that Caesar's body was also made holy. That is, he had a kind of physical sacrosanctity. This sacrosanctity allowed him to interject in any political meeting. And it didn't matter whether it was the Senate meeting or a popular assembly or whether it was just a kind of committee meeting. Caesar could go into that meeting and he could put his body physically in the meeting and say, "I object to what's happening here." And if he did that, the meeting had to stop. And it could not resume again until Julius Caesar gave his say-so. And again, that includes elections. Even if an election had been 99% completed and there was one vote left over to be taken, Caesar could interject himself, say, "I veto, I object to what's happening," and that meeting has to stop. So that is quite significant in terms of additional religious and political power. Caesar also had a personal loyalty oath exacted from every single Roman senator to support him. Caesar also ignored term limits, so he continued to hold the highest office in the Republic over and over again. And for the other positions in the Roman Republic, the other various offices and political positions, Caesar did not consistently hold elections. Instead, he would often just appoint somebody. And in some cases, he would do this years in advance. So he'd say, "Right, Publius, you're going to be this position this year, and then next year I want your brother Gaius to take that position." In many ways, Julius Caesar was acting like a king. In fact, several sources claim that not too long before he died, Julius Caesar held a kind of mock coronation ceremony. His general Mark Antony had held a crown above his head while Caesar was in public in front of the people. And all Caesar had to do was reach out and grab that crown and proclaim himself king. Now we're told that instead Caesar reached out and pushed the crown away. and it was taken into the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, who is the chief deity of the city of Rome. But clearly the implication here was that if Caesar wanted to be king, he could. So even though he didn't take the crown, this was an insult to other elites who saw Caesar as just like them, but who was clearly acting like he wasn't. He was clearly acting like he was better than them. There are a lot of other small things that Julius Caesar did. There's a whole list of them in the biography of Caesar that is written by the imperial secretary Suetonius in the late 1st century AD. I'll quote just a little bit of what Suetonius says. Quote, Caesar was given a golden seat in the Senate House and in front of the speaker's platform. He was given a chariot and litter in the procession for the circus games. He was given temples, altars, statues placed beside those of the gods, a couch, a priest. He was given a month of the year named after him. There were no honors that he did not either confer or receive as he willed. Incidentally, by the way, we still have that month named in honor of Julius Caesar. I'm sure you can figure out which one it is. So finally, in addition to all of these things, these religious, political, social, symbolic honors, Caesar also held the extraordinary and emergency office of dictator. The dictatorship was, in the Roman Republic, an all-powerful position. And because it was so powerful, it carried a maximum term of only 6 months, or the duration of whatever crisis required somebody to be appointed dictator, whichever was the shortest. But Caesar was given the position of dictator for life. And that's the rub. Because in other words, the only way to end Caesar's dictatorship was for Caesar to die. Funnily enough, in his pride, Caesar had elevated himself above every single Roman, and in doing so, in utterly humiliating and alienating these senators, he basically gave them no other option but to stab him to death on the floor of the Senate House. And on the morning of March 15th, 44 BC, that is exactly what they did. So when Caesar first arrived in the Senate House in Rome that morning, I'm sure he was greeted by smiling groups of senators, including the 2 senators that had led the plot to murder him. Famous individuals, famous names, you probably know them, Brutus and Cassius. Caesar, of course, was unaware of the plot, and so he entered the heart of the Roman Republic, the Senate House, totally unarmed. Now, we don't know which senator struck Julius Caesar first. The sources are conflicted about this. Some say it was Brutus. Others say it was Caesar's childhood friend, a man named Casca. And Casca sweeped his dagger, aiming for Julius Caesar's throat, but he swung wildly and ended up missing and stabbing Caesar in the breast. Shocked and stunned, I'm sure Caesar was. This was total treachery, completely unexpected treachery. We're told by one source that he rounded on his attackers, quote, like a wild animal. But of course, it was too late for Caesar. Very quickly, he had been stabbed multiple times. Cassius's blade took Caesar right in the face. So these were serious wounds. And despite the old age of so many of the senators that stabbed Caesar, they of course overwhelmed him. He was mortally wounded. He was stabbed repeatedly, perhaps up to 23 times in total. Caesar lay dying on the Senate floor, bleeding out, surrounded by men who had sworn him an oath of fealty. These were just words, obviously. Their daggers had had the final say. But once Caesar breathed his last painful breath, I'm sure that silence eventually stole through the Senate House. The people that were there ran off. And as word of death spread throughout the city, that it too became silent. The Greek historian Appian, who wrote about 150 years after Caesar's death, says this, quote, all citizens closed their doors and prepared for defense on the roofs. So we have Caesar dead. What is going to happen next? Would the assassins be hailed as liberators of the Roman Republic, or would they be prosecuted as murderers? What about Caesar's loyal officers and soldiers? Were they going to avenge their dictator, or were they going to lay down their weapons and decide to serve the Senate? And what about the Senate? Was the Senate going to reassert its power as a kind of noble guardian of the Roman Republic? Or was there some other Caesar or Caesars ready to take the power vacuum that was available and make a play at power? Well, we'll talk about that next time. Catch you then. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Pax Romana podcast. For more information, including a list of primary sources and further reading, check the show notes. Music by Red Productions and Exocore. Follow Dr. Colin Elliott on X at ProfCPE or email colin@paxromanapodcast.com. Listen to more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or just about anywhere podcasts are available. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.